And as we have seen across the country, the death of George Floyd is a symptom of a larger cold. His death has struck a nerve and sparked anger not only in Minneapolis, but across the country. In New York, a city still on lockdown, many are making their voices heard despite the risks of the pandemic. The street in San Jose, California, filled with protesters. And take a look at this scene in Atlanta. The anger goes from coast to coast. But many watching the violent and destructive images in parts of Minneapolis are asking why. How is this a constructive way to express your frustration? Our Steve Osinsami takes a look at the history of unrest in this country.
To many Americans, it doesn't make sense. Why would you burn down businesses and set fire to the streets?
No peace! No peace!
And in your own neighborhoods.
California's governor has declared a state of emergency for Los Angeles to curb the violence.
White Americans were asking these same questions in the late 1960s as these heartbreaking images of fire and fury beamed into their homes. And they're asking those same questions tonight.
We must confront our shortcomings with both humility as well as hope. We must restore the peace so that we can do this hard work together.
When Black Americans were rioting in the 1960s, many were still attending segregated schools, were kept from registering to vote in the South, and still couldn't sit at white lunch counters. The execution of the greatest civil rights leader this country has ever seen only added gas to the flames. And this was the eruption in Miami.
2 hours has been a raining of bricks and bottles and cans, and you can see in the background some of the debris. These persons here were determined to drive the white cops out of the area.
It too was violent.
Dad would not have wanted it to happen this way, but over 100 cities, over 100, went up in flames between that period of April 4th to April 8th or 9th when he was actually buried. Again, when people are frustrated and have no outlet and have lost hope, that is what happens. And people are beyond tired of going beyond disrespect.
The oldest son of Dr. Martin Luther King says he does not condone the violence and the looting happening on American streets this evening, but he certainly understands it.
It's an inhumane way of treating people. People are looking for humanity. Where is the humanity? Where was the humanity of this police officer who took his knee and the man, it's a different discussion if the man hadn't said anything, but he's begging for relief. Where's your humanity?
I'm seeing on a lot of people's Facebook pages like, what good does it do to burn down neighborhoods, much less your own neighborhoods? What do you say to those people who ask those questions today?
Violence is the language of the unheard. That's what my father said. That was true when he said it, and it's true today. When people feel like they have no recourse, it is the lowest level that they operate on. So while I would not ever condone violence, ever, I do understand the emotions, the anxiety, the frustration that people are going through. And I think, this is wrong. It may be wrong on many levels, but buildings can be restored. How do you restore a human life?
He says what's happening is that Black Americans are telling the rest of the country that they're fed up after the acquittal of white officers who mercilessly beat Rodney King within an inch of his life, after the death of Michael Brown at the hands of a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, who was never charged, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, parts of that city burned.
We live in a society that still sees Black people as violent, as dangerous, as immoral, as untrustworthy. So when they have interactions with law enforcement, we don't get a presumption of innocence. So when things escalate even a little bit, we're more likely to be killed. When things don't escalate, there's a sense that they could if we're not put to excessive force. Black people are subject to a level of threat and a level of danger that their white counterparts simply aren't.
In Minneapolis, these images of people stealing from a Target superstore hit many Americans the wrong way. Just seems like the wrong way to protest. The president came out strong online, calling the protesters thugs, threatening to send in federal soldiers, and saying that when the looting starts, The shooting starts. The language isn't going over well, and Twitter labeled the message violent. The phrase is borrowed from this former police chief in Miami, who in 1968 threatened to crack the skulls of civil rights activists and war protesters at the Republican convention that year. There's actually research on this sort of thing, that protest movements are effective when they're large, broadly representative, sustained over time, and an important part, nonviolent. And researchers find them especially effective when authorities are violent, but the demonstrators are not. Martin Luther King III says some of this is happening on the streets today, and he believes that Minneapolis will not be the last to see its streets set on fire until he says everyone sees the injustice and these Americans feel heard.
And this is not just one ethnic group. It's not just black folk. In other words, Black Lives Matter is not just black folk. In fact, there are a lot of whites who have joined because they see the injustice and they see the unfairness and they see the mistreatment and they say, this is wrong. My dad talked about America becoming what it ought to be. And what it ought to be is a nation where everyone can thrive, where everyone has a decent education or the best education. Everyone has decent housing. Decent housing doesn't have to be a 10,000 square foot home. It could be a 200 square foot home or a 150 square foot home. But in America, everybody should be able to have it. Everybody should be able to have a decent job. Everybody should be able to have justice. And we can create that when we work together.
Yes, indeed, violence is the language of the unheard. Such a poignant statement there. And Steve Osunsami joins us now live from the King Center. Martin Luther King Jr. is certainly an icon of the 20th century, but when he was alive, many had a different view of him.
Yes, Lindsay, some of the same Americans who wax poetically about Dr. King, who was buried directly behind me, would have had a different opinion in the 1960s if they were around to give one when he was alive. During that period, many, if not most Americans, thought he was a troublemaker, that he was a lawbreaker. He made Americans uncomfortable. As you repeat that famous quote, a riot is the language of the unheard, and it is possible to understand that and still condemn the riot. Lindsay?
But there is a difference. I mean, there are several differences, obviously, between now and the 60s. First, there have certainly been advancements in communities of color, but there's also no central figure leading the charge against injustice. How do you think that changes things?
You know, there's no central figure. The only central figure leading the charge here is youth, the young people of this country, who have decided more than any other generation so far that they're not going to stand for these injustices. They have a lower tolerance for this than even our generation, and they're certainly driving this bus. Lindsay?
Steve Osunsami, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.